Imagine waking up on a normal morning and being told you are under arrest, but no one will tell you what you did. You are still allowed to go to work, still allowed to eat breakfast, still allowed to sleep in your own bed, and yet your life has already been taken over by a force you cannot see, understand, or fight. That is the nightmare at the heart of Franz Kafka's The Trial, and it is one of the most unsettling stories ever written. What makes the novel so powerful is that it does not begin with a grand catastrophe. It begins with something far more disturbing, a total lack of explanation. Josef K, an ordinary bank employee, wakes up on the morning of his 30th birthday and discovers that his life has entered a legal process he never asked for, cannot fully understand, and seems unable to escape. From that moment on, the book becomes a journey through confusion, frustration, humiliation, and a growing sense that the world is operating by rules just out of reach. Let's walk through the story carefully because every step matters. Josef K is introduced as a capable, fairly confident man who works in a bank and takes pride in his position. He is not a hero in the traditional sense, and he is not especially sympathetic in the way some protagonists are. He is proud, impatient, and deeply sure that if something goes wrong, logic and effort should be enough to fix it. That confidence is exactly what makes the opening of the novel so effective. He is the kind of man who believes the world makes sense until one morning it doesn't. On his 30th birthday, two men appear in his room and inform him that he is under arrest. They do not explain why. They do not present evidence. They do not take him away in chains. Instead, they behave as if this strange event is somehow routine. One of them even casually eats from K's breakfast. That detail matters because Kafka is not just showing cruelty, he is showing bureaucracy without clarity, power without accountability, and authority so normalized that it becomes almost absurd. K reacts with anger and disbelief. He demands answers. He wants to know who is responsible, what law he has broken, and what this arrest even means. But every question leads nowhere. The men in his room are only messengers of a larger system, and they themselves seem only vaguely aware of how that system works. Right away, Kafka establishes one of the book's central ideas. The most terrifying power is often the power that does not bother to explain itself. The arrest does not remove K from his life. He continues going to work, seeing people, managing his daily responsibilities. At first, he tries to treat the whole thing as a misunderstanding that can be corrected. He believes that if he simply stays calm and rational, the situation will resolve itself. But the novel slowly makes it clear that this is not a problem that can be solved by ordinary methods. The more K tries to understand the court, the more confusing and invasive the whole thing becomes. He is eventually drawn into the legal process, but this court is nothing like a normal court. It does not sit in a clean public building with formal procedures and obvious authority. Instead, it exists in cramped, hidden, almost unreal spaces, often tucked into the upper floors of ordinary buildings. The setting itself feels wrong. It is crowded, airless, and vague, as though the legal system has seeped into private life and contaminated it. As K moves deeper into the process, he encounters a strange mixture of officials, clerks, minor functionaries, and hangers-on. Nobody seems fully in control, yet the system continues anyway. That is one of Kafka's most frightening insights. Power does not need to be elegant to be effective. It only needs to be everywhere. K soon realizes that the court is not interested in his clear explanation, because clear explanation is not what the system runs on. He is expected to participate in a process that has its own logic, but that logic is hidden from him. He attends hearings that feel more like performances than trials. The people in the room are not just judges and officials, they are spectators, neighbors, employees, and curious bystanders. The boundary between justice and social theater begins to collapse. In one of the early hearings, K makes a forceful speech defending himself. He tries to expose the absurdity of the process and insist on his innocence. This should be a dramatic turning point, the moment where reason triumphs. But it is not. Nothing really changes. The speech has no lasting effect. The court remains opaque, and K remains trapped. Kafka keeps stripping away the comforting idea that if you just speak clearly and defend yourself well enough, the truth will win. As the story continues, K begins to encounter a series of unsettling figures who each reveal something about the world he is now living in. There is Frau Grubach, his landlady, who is interested in propriety and appearances more than in real justice. There is Frau Bürstner, a young woman K is drawn to, whose interactions with him are marked by desire, awkwardness, and an uneasy sense of intrusion. There is also K's uncle, who becomes alarmed by the arrest and pushes him toward legal help, convinced that the right connections might still save him. This is where the novel becomes even sadder, because everyone around K is trying to cope in a different way, and none of those ways really work. Some people try to ignore the system, some try to flatter it, some try to interpret it, some try to buy their way through it. But the court remains stronger than all of them, not because it is logical, but because it is impossible to fully see. K's uncle takes him to see a lawyer, Herr Huld, and this introduces another important layer of the novel. Huld is bedridden, self-important, and deeply theatrical. He speaks with the confidence of someone who knows the system, yet he offers very little actual progress. He is one of Kafka's great portraits of institutional dependence, a person who appears to stand between you and disaster, but who may only deepen your helplessness. Around him is also Leni, the lawyer's nurse, who complicates the whole situation with a mixture of care, intimacy, and seduction. At this stage, K is still clinging to the idea that there must be some correct path forward. He still believes the case can be managed if he understands the rules well enough. But the novel steadily undermines that hope. Every new contact, every new explanation, every new strategy makes the case feel less solvable, not more. One of the most important visits in the novel is K's meeting with Titorelli, the court painter. Titorelli is a strange figure, both ordinary and unnerving, and his conversation with K reveals the true shape of the legal nightmare. He explains that in practice, there is no real acquittal. There may be temporary relief or apparent success, but the case can always return. Another option is endless postponement, where nothing is ever resolved, and the process simply continues. In other words, the system does not exist to reach justice, it exists to keep moving. That scene is devastating because it exposes the novel's deepest structure. K is not dealing with a broken system that occasionally fails. He is dealing with a system whose hidden purpose may be to preserve its own existence. The goal is not truth, the goal is continuation. And once that becomes clear, the whole book feels darker. Then comes one of the most famous and important passages in the entire novel, the cathedral scene and the parable known as Before the Law. A priest, who is linked to the court, speaks with K and tells him the story of a man from the countryside who comes to seek access to the law. A gatekeeper bars his way, and the man waits. He waits for years. He tries persuasion. He tries patience. He tries to understand why he cannot enter, but he never gets in. At the very end, he learns that the entrance was meant only for him, and now it is going to close. This parable matters because it condenses the whole novel into one image. A person stands before authority, believing that if he only waits long enough, asks the right questions, or finds the right approach, the truth will be revealed. But the truth never arrives in the form he expects. The door remains closed. The interpretation remains unstable. The law remains distant. Kafka does not make the meaning neat, and that is exactly why the scene is so powerful. As the novel moves towards its end, K becomes more worn down, more isolated, and less certain of himself. He is still proud, still resistant, but the confidence from the beginning has been eroded. What once looked like a problem to solve has become a condition of existence. He is no longer merely defending himself against a charge, he is living inside accusation itself. The final chapter is among the most haunting endings in literature. Two men arrive for K again, and this time there is no meaningful struggle left. He is taken away and executed. The scene is quiet, almost ordinary, which makes it even more horrible. Kafka refuses the release of melodrama. There is no dramatic last-minute rescue, no revelation, no vindication. There is only the terrible finality of a life reduced to procedure. K dies with a sense of shame hanging over the moment, and the novel ends without explaining where that shame comes from. That ending is important because it makes the book more than a story about a man caught in a bad legal process. It becomes a story about the human condition itself. Josef K does not just face a court, he faces a world in which meaning is unstable, authority is opaque, and guilt may exist before any crime is named. That is why the book has lasted so long. So why does the trial still matter today? Because modern life is full of systems that feel larger than the people inside them. We live with forms, algorithms, approvals, denials, automated messages, legal jargon, customer service loops, and institutions that often ask us to prove things without fully telling us what the rules are. Sometimes the process itself becomes the punishment. Sometimes you are expected to comply with a system you cannot properly see. Kafka understood that fear long before the digital age made it feel even more familiar. But the book is not only about bureaucracy, it is also about guilt, self-doubt, and the unsettling feeling that we are being judged by standards we never agreed to. Most people know what it feels like to suspect they have done something wrong, even when they cannot quite name what it is. Kafka takes that private unease and turns it into a whole world. That is why the novel feels so intimate, even when it is strange. And there is another reason the book still hits hard. Josef K believes that being intelligent, composed, and persistent should be enough to save him. The novel shows how fragile that belief is. Life does not always reward clarity, justice is not always visible, and systems do not always care whether you understand them. That is the final sting of the trial. It does not simply warn us about unfair institutions, it asks a deeper question. What happens to a person when the world stops making sense and they are still expected to act as if it does? Kafka's answer is devastating. The person keeps going, keeps asking, keeps hoping, and keeps failing to find the door. And maybe that is why the novel still feels so modern. It captures the quiet terror of trying to live honestly inside a world that will not fully explain itself. In the end, the trial is not only about Josef K's fate, it's about the unsettling possibility that many of us are already living inside systems we do not understand, following rules we did not write, and waiting for clarity that may never come. That is what the novel makes timeless. It does not give comfort, it gives recognition. And once you recognize that feeling, you understand why Kafka still matters. The nightmare is not that the court exists. The nightmare is that it feels familiar.